Welcome back to story time. So there's something else I want to talk about. And there was a point in time some years ago where I I just I was prompted. I have a tendency to say I was curious, but I was prompted by my nanonome to see what is this thing about speaking in tongues, that they do in church. And well, I can't say that was my nanonome, but I was prompted to seek that out. And so I looked at a few videos because I remember going to a church some years ago. And when I finished, I went up for prayer. I mean, when the church was finished, I went up for prayer, and there was a young lady who was younger than me. I didn't recognize her. She was all grown up, and and she was a part of the church. She called me by name, and I'm like, "How do you know my name?" She's like, "I'm Abigail." And I was like, "Wow, Abigail, I can't believe this." I'm like, "You're not Seventh-day Adventist anymore?" Because this was a Sunday church. And she told me she and her husband attended that church, and it's something with the pastor and speaking in tongues, or receiving the gift of the Holy Spirit. She was telling me about that since she was the one to pray with me. And I said, "You know how to do that? You can speak in tongues?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "Wow." I said, I don't know." She said, "All you have to do is just open your mouth, and it will just come. It might not come today, but it will come." So she prayed, but you know, I just thought it was strange. So yeah, nothing came for me. And I also remember when my son he was a baby, and I had gone over to his grandmother's house to leave him for the weekend, and she felt the need to pray for me. She and her sister were sitting at the table eating, so she told me to come and sit down, and she wanted to pray for me. And she prayed, and then she started to speak in this weird language, and I'm like opening my eye, like, what is she doing? Because they didn't do that in our church. So I think maybe, in our church it was like, I don't know if they thought that was kind of evil, like not of God, even though they're all Christians. So when she finished, her sister then automatically began to speak. And I noticed, I said, "Well, hold up. They're saying like similar things." I could tell there was a cadence. I'm like, "This is a language. What is this?" They're actually saying something. I don't even know if they know what they're saying, but they're saying something. I can hear it. Just like I can hear you speak Spanish and someone else and be like, "Oh, okay, I don't know what that language is," but they're speaking a language. So that was the extent of my experience with speaking in tongues. Until this time, I just felt the urge to go and look and see what was this speaking in tongues about. So I look it up, and I find one Black lady, and I'm like, "Okay, let me look at another one." I just wanted to get the gist of what they were doing. So what I got was pretty much, you just start to talk, and it may sound like nonsense to you at first, but you'll talk, and then when you hear yourself repeating like the same thing, then you know you're complete. So I began to try it, and to my utter surprise, utter surprise, it I was just going for a long, long time, and I'm like, "Oh my God, I have a whole lot to say." And I don't even know what I'm saying. I don't know what I'm saying, and I have this much to say. And it didn't sound like anybody else, quote unquote, speaking in tongues to me, but I could tell that I was saying something because it was flowing. I wasn't stuttering or anything. So it was some natural language. It was a language I could tell. What began to happen was, at a certain point, I would get up in the morning, I would go walking around the track. And that's where I began to speak. I was outside in nature. And I began to realize that as I'm speaking and saying certain things, I'm getting pictures in my mind. And so I realized, oh, this is what I'm actually talking about. And when I would do it, some things that seemed to be blocked, now they were moving faster. I mean, the blocks, whatever was like blocking, even though I couldn't tell you word for word or anything what I was saying. Now these challenges seem to like move very fast, very fast. And all I could attribute it to was me speaking this way. So I said before, when we go to the altar, well, you don't need to tell them anything because they already know about you and what your circumstance is. But also part of the reason is that our language is this English language is like a corruption. Our language, our Afro-Wakanda and Afro-Aikaitu languages resonate. They have a resonance with nature. And so it causes changes, literal changes in space and time. It causes changes in physical matter. But this language that we speak, it doesn't do that. So, when we hear, oh, if you think or you speak positively, things will happen. Yeah, it takes a whole lot more time because this English and these Western language, it's like a corruption of the true languages. So I remember going to the altar one day and just, after pouring libation, just speaking like that because I realized that things were moving. I found myself saying this word, I think it was Ekelemo, Ekelemo, Ekelemo. I realized I kept saying that over and over. And but I didn't want to forget it. So at some point I kept saying it over and over. So when I got up from the altar, I would write it down. Now when I wrote it down and I'm just trying to write it like I'm English speaker, so I'm writing it like that. And I look it up and I can't find that word anywhere. And then I just have this thought, okay, how would an African person maybe say it with their accent or spell it? And listen, when I spelled it and I looked it up, I looked it up in the Akan tradition and it was a word and the word meant you. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, oh my God, I'm actually saying things. I'm learning at the altar. So there were about 3 or 4 different words that I'm conscious of that were Akan words that I was actually speaking, and I wrote down afterwards that I found in the Akan dictionary. This language that we speak. So we could be speaking a very ancient. It could be a very ancient form of the Akan language, as far as I know. But those words were in their present day dictionary. It was in their present day dictionary. And so there's a resonance there that causes things to move. And I literally saw by doing that, I began to know what I was talking about because I would get pictures in my mind. I didn't have an intention to talk about something or anything like that. I just began to speak. And that speaking, it's even reminding me right now, is clearing up some things. And so if you know how to do that, that's one of the ways to bypass your conditioned thinking. It's one of the ways to bypass that and clear some space for you to be able to see and learn. The altar is a place of learning for Afro-Wakandan and Afro-Right people.